Bill Costlow, Performance. He's CEO of Performance Marketing and Premier Connect. He's got an interesting story. He's got a fabulous topic. He knows a lot of famous people. I am not one of them. But he has some great stories to tell. But the topic today could not be more timely and more important. It is navigating logistics and the supply chain. We all know about the supply chain. We've all been impacted by the supply chain, whether it's the prices we're paying, the empty shelves we're looking at, or the delays in getting what we want. So if you're an entrepreneur, how do you manage that? This entrepreneur is going to talk to us about it. Thank you, Bill, for coming. Welcome to the NBC. Thank you very much.
So as a slide, it's kind of a background of what I've done in my career. 40 years with Mercedes-Benz, 18 years with Mercedes-Benz, 40 years in the automotive industry. So that's kind of like being in combat in the automotive industry, because you deal with people. Nobody wants to go into the side of business that I operated, which was called fixed operations or service. So it's kind of like going to the dentist. You take your car in there, they take a bunch of money from you, and you don't really know what they did. My time with Mercedes-Benz, I dealt both on the North American content and also in the European content and the Americas as well. Importing, exporting automotive products, cars, tires, parts. As you can imagine, the logistics of all that is quite interesting to be extremely challenging. How are you? Recognize one of my business partners, Ms. Hannah Waters, right here. So, part of my time with Mercedes-Benz, I served as president for 8 years in the 25 stores in this Mid-Atlantic region, which kind of goes back to what Vivian said. I had pleasure and displeasure sometimes dealing with some pretty high-level people that were freaking out about their cars and used to call me up and say, "You know who I am?" And my response was, I would try and find someone to tell them who they were. So, you know, at the end of the day, the car is kind of the big equalizer of life. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If your car breaks down on the side of the road, the tow truck still has to go get it. It still has to bring it in. So that kind of stabilizes everybody's attitude. It doesn't matter how many millions of dollars you have. If you're sitting on the side of the road, you're still sitting on the side of the road. Currently, I'm CEO of 2 companies. Premier Connect does call center services in the United States. We have a call center partner in Maryland, one in Florida, and in the Philippines as well. We touch over 2,000 stores nationally. We do chats, so sometimes if you call an automotive dealership for service, you think you're talking to the dealership, you're not actually talking to them, you're talking to a company like mine. And then as far as international, national programs, working with programs in the United States, nationally, Southeast Asia, and their call center, and kind of creating the ability to bring in and out programs as you go throughout the United States and also internationally. So this is the textbook definition of what logistics is, right? So very broad range of what logistics is, but logistics boils down to how you get products and services from one location to another location to an end user customer, either B2C or B2B. Started in the military, so there's always the comment, logistics wins wars. So as far as what we need to do, look at Ukraine. So in the case of Putin, he decided he wanted to attack Ukraine, figured it was going to be done in 2 or 3 weeks, didn't support the logistics to do that venture beyond 2 or 3 weeks. Now he's running out of ammunition and has been doing it. Unfortunately, he's continuing the war, but that's how World War II was won. That's how most other businesses function as far as getting products through the pipeline to the end user client. Any questions or comments about logistics, specifically how it works? Trucking companies, rail companies, shipping companies, all of those things are involved. During COVID, my company was fortunate enough to kind of pivot and create hand sanitizer out of products that are used like these. We have detail products and automotive products. Isopropyl alcohol, which you couldn't get, we actually had access to rail cars of that. It wasn't being used for other purposes. So the question became, how do I get a rail car from Texas to Colorado to get it into the plant? Especially when there's nobody there to actually hook a trailer because people are walking. So all that stuff was transferred over to people that were independent truckers, they transferred up. That's the logistics side of it. If your logistics falls apart, as we all saw in 2020, everybody went into the store at the beginning of 2020, and I've never seen anything like it in my career. We all haven't seen it. It was hard time to see what the depression was like, essentially. And the shelves, no toilet paper, no anything. It was a snowstorm and steroids. So, supply chain. Again, textbook definition of a supply chain. Supply chain is basically an entire network of anything that's put together to get something from a supplier in raw materials, all the way through B2B, B2C. Business to business, business to consumer. That supply chain starts with raw materials. Raw materials can be anything from cotton for cotton balls, swabs you use. And we don't really think about something along those lines when we go back and take a look at a product that we grab off the shelf. Now, I brought in McDonald's because we're going to talk about McDonald's, which is kind of the key of vertical integration and supply chain management. McDonald's owns everything from the farmers that create the lettuce and the tomatoes and the beef and all the way through when I went and got this. So when you look at that supply chain, any hiccup in that supply chain causes an issue that ripples out all the way through the end consumer and also the B2B side. Any questions on supply chain? Yes?
I have a question about something you said, the isopropyl glycol, like turning it into hand sanitizer.
Isopropyl.
Isopropyl, okay, I thought it was isopropylene, I was going to say.
No, ethylene glycol is, that's antifreeze.
My bad, yeah, I was about to say.
That's
I was
antifreeze.
really confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, at the end of the day, it starts in the supply chain with the raw material. So what I did is I kind of gave you some ideas of some raw material. So, if we look back in history and we think about what the Industrial Revolution was in the United States. The base of the Industrial Revolution in this country was steel. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, grew up very poor. My family was steel miners, steel millers, coal miners, and the like. So base stock products can be the top photo here. You've got bolts of aluminum. Bottom, you've got bolts of steel. So when I would go to the factory in Mercedes-Benz in Germany, the raw material would actually come in just in time, which was very interesting. So they would have a computer that would weigh these bolts of steel, and they would determine how much was left and how many cars they could actually make with the remaining bolts of steel. Computers would send an email out to the provider of the bolt of steel that would then come back and get delivered just in time. So it was amazing orchestration to see them get down to the last 3 bolts of steel and know that that was going to be 10 cars more because that was it. And then a train would actually come into the factory on the rails and deliver the steel. And a lot of companies, whether it's chemical companies we're going to go through or automotive companies, they do what's called a hub mentality, right? So you basically have the hub as the center, and you have the spokes of the wheel, or your vendors. So in the case of Mercedes-Benz, they've got plants in Singlefingen, they've got plants in Stuttgart, they've got plants in Bremerhaven, and they put suppliers, Bosch, the steel company, electronic company, paint company, all that's around them. And their job is to provide that just-in-time inventory in the supply chain. On a more global scale, we're moving steel out to countries we probably shouldn't be. But in the United States, the steel that comes out of the United States is a much stronger product. It's more stable. It's better for construction. We also operate where we take steels and we do a splash blending those steels together. So aluminum and steel together creates a high-strength light alloy steel, which allows you to have a car door which is strong, but not as heavy. So increasing your miles per gallon, but you're not sacrificing any strength. Years ago, the only solution was to make it thicker. Now we've gotten a lot smarter. Going to the chemical engineering side, those are some of the things that they look at. How you splash blend products together, paints, reduced weights, plastics, things of that nature to make cars more effective, and other products more effective across the board. Farming and agriculture products is part of the raw materials. Every single one of us touches every single day. So whether you're going to the store, whether you're going to McDonald's, whether you're going to Starbucks, whatever the case is, there's something from an agricultural side that goes into the product. I saw a Starbucks cup here, so any cafe lattes, you're going into the farm products. You also have a supply chain that thinks about plastic lid, cups, things of that nature. So as you look at the scope of the supply chain, it runs across the gambit. Grains, everything that we couldn't get in 2020, the basics, the breads, all that stuff collapsed. And so when I was looking at how we discuss the supply chain, that's one of the things that came to my mind, was what I experienced, what you experienced in 2020, and what we're still experiencing. We all go to Amazon and we order things. I'm a big Amazon person. It's just easy, it's simple, pay more, but at the end of the day, it's done. So when you go on and it's not there, and in the automotive space, you couldn't get a car, so they weren't available, and then the simple things weren't available. So the staples that every one of us use and come to believe that we can get at the drop of a hat, or out there, the supply chain completely collapses. That's the best example of how a supply chain falls apart and how much effort it takes to put it back together. In 2020, when we were trying to bring products in from China, there weren't ships leaving. So there's pretty much 3 ways to get things out globally across, whether it's,
Yeah, but you can finish.
so basically you can send it by ship, you can send it by plane, or you can send it by alternative sources, trucking, things of that nature, moving it to a location that goes out. In shipping, there's 2 kinds of ships. There's your standard ship, which takes about 20 to 25 days, and then they have called the fast ship, which goes from point A to point B, doesn't stop. Other shipping companies, they may leave China, they may stop in Africa, they may stop Cape, bottom Horn of Africa, they may come around and come up the Atlantic, or they may go west and they go through the Pacific, depending on what it is. But when we were trying to bring things out, we were timing exactly how many days it was taking. Because we were getting people from the government contacting us saying, can you give us gloves, can you give us hand sanitizers, how many days is it gonna take? So as you can imagine, with the logistics completely collapsing and the supply chain collapsing, getting any products out of Europe, getting any products out of Asia was a mess. So everything went into companies like DHL, who were charging ridiculous amounts of money to get things shipped in by air. But the shipping companies were doing that.
Oh, I was going to say, obviously you're an entrepreneur, so you know like the business aspect of it, but the way you're talking about like the engineering aspect of it makes me think you're an engineer. Did you major in engineering?
No, I have a bachelor science degree in finance and an MBA in marketing, but I was an automotive technician when I started.
Oh, okay,
So I started working on cars way back in the day.
yeah.
Comcast when I was 14 years old, worked my way up, in the automotive space. So you have to understand the engineering side in my space, because you have to understand, you're back there studying chemical engineering. I got an immersion in chemical engineering when we went into this. So when I went into our automotive fluid division, I learned about all these companies. So chemicals and formulations in everything that we touch on a daily basis. And our company, this is one of 45 different products that we have out there. They go into your car, they can put wax on your car, a bunch of different products that we have, but it all boils down to base stock chemicals that create these products. And that's also part of the supply chain. So as I go out and take a look at creation of a new product, as our partners look at the creation of a new product, I have to go back to the raw material side and say, is that available? What are the components that go into that? Is it A, B, C, D? Who do I talk to? Dow, 3M, Lubrizol, ExxonMobil, Shell, whoever. All of these different products go into plastics. They go into Under Armour products that you wear every single day if you buy Under Armour products. They go into your car. They go into the Starbucks cups. You just don't think about that. So when you take a look at a supply chain, you have supplies coming in from different sources. You have plastics that say, for instance, I use Starbucks again. You've got agricultural products going in there. You've got plastics going in there. You've got paper products going in there. So when you think about anything you buy, any one component in that supply chain collapses, the product falls apart. And that's why the integration of the supply chain is so important. Well, people don't think about it. I like to not think about it sometimes. So, crude oil and petroleum products. I only brought this up here from the point of, if you look at that little eye chart at the bottom, the list, this is a small list of what makes, what byproducts of petroleum. So when people think about, we're gonna change petroleum or go to clean energy, I'm working on some of that stuff now. One of the things that you have to think about is what other byproducts that petroleum does and how we have to replace those. But as far as our everyday life, obviously gasoline, engine oils, plastics, telephones, phones, cell phones, all of those things are all byproducts. Asphalt that you drive on every single day. So again, when you have the groups of products that fall into the supply chain, going back to the beginning of any supply chain, you have that raw material, and that raw material falls apart, that raw material is unavailable, then the supply chain collapses as it relates to that specific product. Any questions on that? So materials and base materials for medicines, first aids, things of that nature. Chemical engineering. So cotton I mentioned, agriculture, goes into bandages, cotton swabs, myriad of things you don't think about, clothes. polyesters, which are synthetics. Under Armour's great at creating products. I love Under Armour. So they have great products that keep you warm, keep you cool. And the reason they do that is because they're using chemicals and synthetics to create products that will allow air to go through, in some cases not go through for cold gear, air to go through for hot gear. So the prescription-based components that you have, the base elements of each one of those, all create that. Believe it or not, we don't make penicillin in this country. Did you all know that? Aspirin manufactured in this country, 10%. So if we go to war with China, people, guess what we're not getting? So what we did learn, I hope, out of 2020, was that we need to take control of the supply chain. We have the raw materials in a lot of cases. Semiconductors. A lot of talk about Taiwan right now. Not getting into geopolitical conversation, but semiconductors, if Taiwan goes down, you can pretty much forget getting any semiconductors out of Taiwan. Or the price of them really goes through the roof. Fortunately, 2 or 3 companies are starting to work in Texas and California to create semiconductors in the United States. So that exposure that occurred over the last 2 years exposed the Achilles heel of our country. For years, you know, people, I'm in the same group, we like to go to Walmart, we go to the store and pay a limited amount for everything and get the best price on it. That's a determination that's gonna have to be made, whether that makes sense strategically in the United States. Because I can tell you, being on the inside of the supply chain when 2020 happened in 2021, it was scary. Because the kind of money that was spent, the kind of deals that were made, the kind of things that had to happen to get something from Asia to the United States, from Europe to the United States were insane. I was working 20-hour days to try to get deals done. Because you're working, you know, I've gotta be up when China's up. I also found out that when the Chinese government says, yes, that's okay for a company to do something, that means that the Chinese government gets paid somehow. So, recreating that supply chain during that period was extraordinary and Herculean for a lot of companies. Still surviving. Companies are still trying to get it together. I can tell you trucking costs for shipping our products have gone up 600%. So that has to go to a consumer. We'll charge a business that, but then the business has to charge the consumer to recoup that money. So we talked about the supply chain and why it's important. So without an effective supply chain, everything that we get every single day is done as far as products and goods. Now you still can use your cell phone, but you can't get a new cell phone. And anybody that was trying to get a new cell phone, including me, who ran over with my tractor in 2020, didn't have fun trying to get a cell phone. I had to go back to an older model to then come forward to a newer model a year later. And you just need to think back, I mean, I know everybody in this room, so we all went through 2020, getting masks. Right now you can get a box of 50 masks for probably $4.99. We sold masks in 2020.
Yeah, that stuff is like $50, like $40.
I sold masks for $1.13 in April of 2020.
Oh, one mask per phone.
One mask. It was insane because we were one of the few companies that could get it. And we were small. I mean, in comparison, we're a multi-million-dollar company. We were going up against large providers. Sometimes when you have a big company, and this is a lesson that I learned, if you've got a big company, it's a big aircraft carrier. It takes a lot to switch that. It takes a lot of effort, fuel, time, space to get that aircraft carrier to move. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, being nimble and being close to the point where you can make a decision within 24 to 48 hours makes a huge difference. If it's got to go through some hierarchy where decisions are being made, which I saw a lot of companies that had to do that, oh, let's take this under consideration, we'll take it under advisement, we were already ahead of them. We were already saying to somebody else, what's it going to take to get that deal done? Who do we have to pay? Who do we need to bring into this deal? Who do I need to connect with? And that's why all that extra entrepreneurial effort, working on the phones and communicating with people is important. Because that's how we got things done when larger companies could. I was partnered with CEOs of pharmaceutical companies who had basically collapsed their normal supply chain and were talking to companies like us because we had somehow done some kind of grassroots thing that they hadn't thought of yet. So when you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, that's one of the biggest things I can tell you. Think outside the box.
So you're saying that in your specific company, you guys didn't have to go through like a higher up of like approval, like around the board? So how did you guys,
I'm
was it like,
CEO.
so you just made the decision?
With people like Aaron and my other partners, we talked about it.
How do
We
you-
sat and we talked in a 20 or 30-minute conversation. I said, hey, this is what I think we can do, and Aaron can attest to this. We failed, right? So there was times where I would come in and I would say, I think this deal's gonna get done. We're gonna make X amount of money. And then somebody would be full of crap on the other side, and they would tell me, oh yeah, I can get X, Y, Z, and they couldn't get it. Or the plane didn't leave, or the ship didn't come in. Or, in one of our cases, the federal government decided to just take our stuff because they had the Defense Production Act. And the response was, too bad, so sad, go back to your person who sold it to you and get your money back.
So what's the?
So,
So if you're in that situation, and let's say Erin, if I don't,
yeah,
let's say Erin's not available, it's 2020 and she has COVID, what would you do in that situation?
I make a decision, that's what my job is.
Okay, cause I'm in a position.
Buck stops
where-
with me and the company, you know, I have business partners, my business partner, Rocio, she and I are collaborative on everything, but at the end of the day, good decisions or bad decisions is my final decision. When you're an entrepreneur, whether you're running a wedding company, or you're doing an art company, as you spoke of, or you're trying to create something, those decisions come to you, those are your final, the buck stops with you. And you're not always gonna be right. I've made wrong decisions in my life. That's how you learn. You get smacked around a little bit and you go, don't do that again, it hurt, right? I used to call it slamming my head in a car door. You only do that like 2 or 3 times before you say enough, I'm not doing that anymore. So, to answer your question, those decisions fall on either a team in a corporation, board of directors, CEO,
Mhm.
but usually it takes time to get that information to the top.
Yeah, no, the only reason I asked is I'm the president of ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers at the school, and like there was candy that was like 50% off, like Halloween candy, right, at Walmart, and I called a lot of people to approve the decision to stock up on candy, but by
What's
the
the-
time they responded, all the candy was out.
What's the downside of that decision?
I should have just made the decision from
Right, but what's the downside if you make a wrong decision? That's the risk reward.
Then I would have used the club's money, but then after the vice president was like, you're the president, you can just give the candy.
You do a risk reward for those decisions when they come up.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, if your club decides, oh no, I don't want you spending that money, then you pull the money out of your pocket. I bet if you had said, I made a decision and they balked at it, and you said, no, you know what, I'm so confident in my decision, I'm gonna actually pay for it. The conversation probably would have stopped.
Yeah, no, I should have just. Too late now.
But it's risk reward.
I waited, yeah.
It's like anything in life, you know, they call the theory of the sunk cost, right? You drill a hole and you don't find oil, do I stop or do I drill another hole and try and spend more money and find oil? How far you go down that road before you make your determination? So, you know, the connections that you create, the ability, of how you integrate with people, and as you're building businesses, if you're gonna be entrepreneurs, I can't stress this enough, create strong relationships. Get to know who you do business with, don't just keep it peripheral. And I probably get to know people too much and I know their story a little too much and I'm a little more empathetic than I should be. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, that makes a difference. Because the people are vested in you, you're vested in them, you're not just another person that just is chatting about it. So, looking at supply chains can be very simple. It can be, I buy product completed, product gets delivered, then the product gets given to either a client or an end user consumer. So in this case, you have manufacturing, shipping, distribution or a DC, retail location, store shelf, end user consumer pays for it. Amazon, to a great degree, does not own a lot of what we buy every single day. Amazon is what's called a DC or a distribution center. Amazon takes products from companies that are willing to give it to them on consignment, and then Amazon connects A and B and C's the cash, which is a hell of a model. Supply chains can be extremely complex also. They can involve multiple suppliers, they can involve multiple shipping companies, multiple manufacturers. A product could be manufactured in one location to a certain point, say 20% of its completion, and then have to move to another location to have things added to it. Defense industry is a big one there. So companies that do Northrop Grumman, large aerospace companies, they'll do a portion They'll have someone come in, although they keep it in-house, they have someone come in who finishes that component, whether it's the avionics, a company like Raytheon will come in and do the avionics on it. Then they could do the weapon systems, which they may not do the weapon systems, there's somebody else that has to do the weapon systems, they're creating the airframe, plane. The engines come in from a company like General Electric or Pratt & Whitney, they come in and put an engine in the plane. So as you look at the complexity of something, that's a good example of how complex things are. In this example, it's moving around from place to place to place. You may ship raw goods, in case of, we're gonna talk about McDonald's in a second. They ship lettuce and tomatoes and all that stuff, that goes someplace else, right? That goes to a distribution center or an agricultural distribution center that then slices things up or packages in a way that goes into a truck and then that gets delivered to their main distribution center for an area, and then it gets created in more product, and then that product gets delivered frozen to the store, and then it goes to the consumer. So, that's why I brought this up, the key and the king of the whole vertical integration. Does everybody understand how vertical integration works? Okay, so vertical integration is on one hand. Vertical integration is you own everything from, say, bread. You own the farming company that farms it. You own the granary that takes the grain and puts it in. You own the milling company that takes that grain and then ships it out to a company that makes it into bread. You own the shipping company that ships it to the store. You own the store that sells it to the client. That's what they're getting at. That's complete vertical integration. Very, very tough to do. I did my thesis on a company called AutoNation in the automotive industry, and they did vertical integration. They collapsed because you can't be everything to all people to a great degree because you're not an expert in all those fields, and you have to rely on other people. It also requires a massive capital investment to do that. McDonald's does a great job of this, and they do it not only nationally, internationally, globally. Suppliers, processing hubs, distribution network, restaurants, preparation, delivery, and consumer. That's really, you know, the 5 points of what McDonald's is in a very complex network of things. The reason why I picked them was because Fortune 50 company, but also one that we all recognize. I know when I was in college, I was eating McDonald's almost every single day. Or eating $1 tacos at Jersey Brown, whatever was cheaper. So when you think about a company their size, and the reason why I selected them is because if they're that good at it, based on these numbers, how incredible is that? So you got 14,000 McDonald's in the United States, one on every street corner. Not bad for a guy that started in the 50s with 2 or 3 stores. 37,000 McDonald's globally, 2 billion eggs annually just in the US. Think about the coordination in the agriculture space with chickens, eggs, distribution, getting into stores. Not broken, by the way. They're not freezing the eggs and sending them so they're protected. They're in a position where they can be broken. 550 million Big Macs sold, 9 million pounds of French fries back to agriculture, all those potatoes yesterday.
Question, so you talked a little bit about the backstory of McDonald's, and I don't really know, can you like inform me about like, so like I know vertical integration starts from first step to last step. I know some entrepreneurs that didn't have enough capital, like you said, to start off, and they had to use their savings, and so they used partner companies that had like machinery but didn't know how to use it, and then they were
Well,
able.
McDonald's started as a very small, with one person, who was a salesman in a different form, and went around and sold the concept of McDonald's, and they had a very small amount of restaurants.
Did you make this a partner or?
No. So, actually, I think he was also in car business.
Oh,
So, at the end of the day, what he was able to do is sell the vision of what McDonald's would be. Never did he imagine what McDonald's would become.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, he was able to show that you could, what Americans really wanted during the time that he was pitching it, was somewhere they could go get food that was reasonably priced and was very fast. Which at the time wasn't normal. Having the ability to go out and do what we do every single day, go into a place and get a drink, go get food, be in and out in 10 minutes, unless you're a Chick-fil-A, you know, was something that was unheard of. Everybody cooked in the house. It was a process. When I was younger, there was dinner. You sat around the table, you talked, dinner was cooked, it was an hour, 45 minutes, and that, but when McDonald's came to the thing, it was the idea of, oh, you just pull in and pull out, you get your dinner. So that changed the landscape, not only of the business, but it changed the fabric of our country. So when we look at how our country came to be, you know, where we are today, McDonald's is one of those companies that kind of set that standard for the fast food industry, but also our fast consumption society that we all exist in. So I said they're king of vertical integration. I won't get too deep into that part of it, but again, grower, processor, transportation. They own their own trucks, which is huge. They own their own trailers for that part, and they own their own tractors, which is the other part. They have their own trucking and logistic company. They don't rely on outside companies. For us, I have to rely on outside companies. And what's been happening recently is companies have been saying, you know what, you're not paying me enough, I'm not showing up to pick up your stuff, somebody else has got something else they want me to pick up for more money, which is insane. So McDonald's said, we're not gonna do any of that. They don't have any outside distribution centers that handle their stuff. There's outbound transportation, again, goes back to their trucks. Their trucks deliver to their stores, all their packaging. So when you take a look at what goes into what I got today, French fries and nuggets, paper, chicken, breading, fries, packaging, all that stuff has to come from different sources. McDonald's actually has paper companies that they own. Now, they don't mill the paper, but they have their own printing sites. So the things that affect normal entrepreneurs, where you have a vendor that can't provide something, they don't do it.
Do they do even down to like the adhesive that holds the French fry?
No, they won't, no, they
Like
won't do that.
3M?
That'd be 3M,
Okay,
but they get pretty, you know, when you think about a vertical integration company,
Yeah.
McDonald's is up there at the top. There's some things that don't make sense.
yeah, it's for them to do that.
Right? So that's a chemical engineering thing where you don't wanna get into that space, there's a whole bunch of EPA things that have to be done in relation to that. So, how McDonald's works is basically around that hub, is they go with their production, the distribution, food processing, which is the making of whatever the product is, the marketing and purchasing, preparation, consumption, and waste recovery. One thing they do a great job with is recycling. They really, really focus on that, and I give them a lot of credit because that's not easy at all. So, I pitch it to you guys. So, questions? Companies that you think you use daily, brands you use daily, what do you imagine that supply chain looks like? And where do you see the pitfalls that could potentially happen with not getting it? Right?
Okay, I
How
guess.
about you first?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start with Pepsi, cause I already talked about 3M with like the adhesive.
Mhm.
So with like a mechanical engineering background, I'm thinking, like I do think sort of like a chemical engineer, like what's in it, like what's in the Pepsi. So first you have to design like what the drink is, right?
Right.
So that starts in the lab, and then from there, when they figured out the drink, then they have to figure out how they're going to package it. So whether it be can, glass bottle, 2 liter,
Where's
those.
the can, so then we got aluminum, plastic.
Yeah, and one plastic, so then they have to figure out where they're getting those things from. And then from there, how are they putting it together, cause this has to be like pressed down, so are they using automation, like
Of course.
a robotic, right, cause they're not using probably people nowadays. And then from there, it has to go out, like, to the distribution center and then transport it all over the world and probably, or at least like I know the Guinness down the street, they're the only ones who produce the blonde beer,
Mhm.
like if you're familiar. And, they have to produce, like send it worldwide, and like the only place that produces blonde beer is like Maryland, is that one location, so that's how I.
It's a regional flavor.
What, the blonde?
Yeah, so they say it's a regional blend.
Oh, yeah, I don't really know too much about beer, I just know that.
No, I don't know,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's a regional blend.
Yeah.
So, it's the same thing, so Pepsi and Coca-Cola do test markets of different products. I recently tried, I think it's called their Starlight Pepsi. Anybody try that? What'd you think of it?
It's like regular Pepsi
I'm
with like a little bit of
Yeah, just
something
confused-
that's
yeah,
weird.
just confused what the market is.
Yeah, it's like, huh?
I don't think anybody's here to old enough to remember New Coke.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, I know.
So Coca-Cola got this really good idea. They were getting their butts kicked by Pepsi for a certain period of time. Back in like 80s, 90s area, Michael Jackson had signed on with Pepsi, and so Pepsi was getting a lot of interest. So Coke kind of freaked out, and they've been going back and forth, but Coke's always been. So Coke gets straight idea, we're gonna make a product that tastes like Pepsi. New Coke. Horrible decision. People freaked out. Me too. oh, I'm not drinking it, it was horrible. But that error actually created a niche market for Coke. It created people who said, I want Coke Classic, and that's what Coke Classic is. So as Coke goes out there to try these regional flavors, now, thinking globally, you buy Coke in Korea, it's not the same as the United States.
Yeah.
China, not the same here, South America, not the same here, Mexico, not the same here, we all know that, right? I've been around, I've gone into a place and, oh, I'm gonna have a Coke now. What is this? Oh, that's it. You go into Germany, into a McDonald's, you can buy Beck's beer and Heineken if you're 14 years old. And it's in a cooler. You just go get it. And in Germany, they're starting to drink at 6 a.m. in the morning, they don't care. So, any of these other products that Walmart, who here has been to Walmart? Right? Most of us. Right? Walmart gets thousands of vendors who have hundreds of people that are providing supplies to get their products. So when you go into Walmart and you see TVs in the back, or prescriptions in the front, or candy in the front, or fruits and everything else, that's a microcosm of a massive supply chain. And you got a company that started out very, very small, and that was able to leverage that to be successful. Not just a supply chain, but also the Amazon model where they're getting other people to kind of bring their products in. If you get selected to go to Walmart, and they don't like your product, guess what? You get your product back. That's part of the contract. So to work with Walmart, you gotta be a big player. And we were talking about gloves and hand sanitizer, one of the people that we sold to was Rite Aid Pharmacies. We had talked to Walmart, and then Walmart people had told me exactly how their model worked, that if my product didn't sell 6 months later, that was gonna get it back. I said, I'm not interested in this kind of stuff. Because the price of what I paid for getting isopropyl alcohol to create hand sanitizer in March of 2020 wasn't really the same as it was in November of 2020. I pretty much knew that. So, thanks. Any of these any companies that you think of that you think would benefit from a better supply chain?
I was thinking of just like Chipotle, cause like I often hear about how they have some type of bacteria going on with their food, and like they're always saying like, oh yeah, we changed, we don't go to that guy anymore, so it's not gonna happen again.
Oh, is that the deal?
Yeah, that's how they address it.
We're gonna go to a vendor that doesn't kill as many people?
Yeah, but like it always keeps happening, so it makes me just think of like, oh, okay, Chipotle, you're doing something, so that's why it doesn't. If it's different people, and then you guys.
Well, it could be a preparation side.
Yeah,
right?
that's
It could
what.
be the fact that they're not taking the proper care, the health standard to prepare it.
Mhm.
The H&M, it's on next to the Nike,
Mhm.
I think, I may be wrong, but I think the people that make the clothes work in like sweatshops, is that right? And I think that's something that could be improved in the supply market, like looking at who's making the clothes, and then when you're buying it for so cheap, thinking, why are you buying it for so cheap? It's because someone else is getting paid, like, cause there's different GPM per capita in different countries.
Yep.
So like using that, like that H&M company is utilizing that low GPM, or you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's not uncommon in the garment industry.
Did you say it's not uncommon? Yeah,
It's
no,
not-
I
it's
know.
not uncommon.
I just saw that and I thought of it, the H&M,
Alright,
cause
so-
they're low price.
We were importing, early on, we were importing gloves from Malaysia.
Mhm.
And I'd done an order, and it came into Long Beach in California, and it was sitting offshore. Couldn't figure out why it was sitting offshore. I found out that it was quarantine. The reason it was quarantine is because they had child labor problems in Malaysia.
Wow.
So the Malaysian government had gone in there and found out that there was 10, 12, 13-year-olds that were working there. So one of the biggest glove manufacturers in the United States got shut down. Their counterpart in Asia got shut down as a result of that. And then when Malaysia started going around, the government started going around, they found more and more and more of this. And it should be no revelation to them, because the reason why they can sell things at a price is because
Children.
it's labor.
But I think like part of this, I think some of this, do you ever feel like there's not enough people focused in the supply chain? Like,
100%.
yeah, like I feel like they don't, this talks a lot about what you need, where you get it from, what's going on with that, but I feel like it's not as person focused as it should be, because that's the whole reason the pandemic was such a terrible event. Because I mean, even if you think about your supply chain is perfect, everything's running great, and a machine breaks, that has nothing to do with your supply chain, but you have to hire the guy that fixes that machine. And you have to think about, okay, well, how much am I gonna pay them for one machine, or how am I gonna pay them for, these are things that you have to factor in, and even the Malaysia, like keeping your stuff offshore, like, not knowing what's going on in a whole nother government where your supplies come from, like, that is really important.
It's huge,
And
which
I-
is why people major in supply chain management.
Yeah.
Major? So I did not know that.
Yeah, College Park's got a major supply chain. So it's, because it's so complex, because you need to be so vertically integrated.
How would you describe the supply chain of companies that deal with digital products?
Supply chains of companies are what?
Deal with digital products, such as like ebooks, like the Kindle, or not, well, like
Well,
what's on the Kindle?
Is the product itself created by the company, or is it replicated off something else? So is there a creative component in that?
Well, if we were talking about like ebooks, then it would be like the authors that would create it. But
Well, there would be people that would program that, right? There would be the hardware suppliers that would do that. The creative content, is that created by them, or is it usurped or used by somebody else that they've gotten, that they've just replicated somebody else's content?
so if digital products have like, I guess I'm digital products, do companies with lower supply chains have higher profit margins?
Not necessarily. Depends on what the cost structure is. Usually, when you have a shorter supply chain, you have less associated costs, because less hands are tied together. That's not always the case. So in the case of digital, so you have content, so you're saying digital, like you say, they've taken a book and they put it on an e-reader. So they've gotta then ship that from one location to a distributing site, or Amazon, or whomever. In the hardware, in the book, there could be multiple suppliers. Could be a chip supplier, could be a screen supplier, could be a software supplier. So when you're breaking down that e-reader, let's say, and you said it's digital, is it online, or are they actually holding an element to do that? We can do books on our phones every single day, so the e-readers have all kind of gone to the wayside. Back when I was in college, it was almost the whole, what I used to call a scam of books, right?
Yeah.
Pay $75 for a book, and you take it back, and they give you $5.
Yeah.
Just to blow it away. I used to give up on like using the pink markers. I'm like, oh, I'll pink marker. I'm not gonna pink marker because I get more money. That didn't work. I just blow it apart. You know? So, you know, when you take a look at the change, and you're talking about readers, how many books are you all carrying around these days? None. Yeah, very few.
That's a good one.
Are you handing out books still?
I don't hand them out, but they.
I'm kidding.
I have two questions. One is, basically, how is vertical integration not a monopoly?
How's it not a monopoly? Well, because you're not stopping somebody else to compete in the same space.
Okay.
Monopolistic behavior is I prevent you from doing something.
Like if McDonald's was the only burger, like fast food joint
Or if
around.
McDonald was doing practices that prevented other people from doing it. So when you think back monopolistic empires, you think back to like fuels, back at the turn of the century, railroads. There were few, you know, companies that were doing that. So if the monopoly of that was done with a group of people.
Gotcha.
Getting deeper, going to like Michael Porter's 5 forces model, there's a component called barriers of entry. One of the barriers of entry is the huge amount of capital necessary to do certain things. That creates kind of a monopolistic thing. You can't afford to put the infrastructure together for a railroad, you can do it. One of the projects I've been working on is EV cars, right? So we're all talking about EV cars. One of the questions that I brought up to somebody at a large automotive company was, how many years did it take for us to have a gas station on every street corner? So in 1900s, we started having gas. Now you go around, there's a Wawa, Sheetz, Exxon, Shell on every street corner. How many years is it gonna take for us to have the same thing in the United States and have an infrastructure that's capable of doing that? So when we're looking at EV cars, we need to look at, going back to the beginning, almost the supply chain of electricity for those cars. Where's it gonna come from? It's coal-fired. One of the funny things I said to them was, I saw a Mercedes-Benz broken down the side of a car. They sent out a diesel truck with a diesel generator to charge that electric car. I said, you got 2 combustion vehicles burning fuel to charge an electric vehicle. Explain the wisdom of that to me. So, when you're going back to the supply chain and the infrastructure side, that's what you're talking about, is you're talking about infrastructure. You build an infrastructure, that can create a barrier of entry for someone coming in, That doesn't mean it's monopolistic, it just means that it would be expensive for you to replicate that. Very
Sorry,
simple.
and my second question was, based on your experience and your I guess the history of it, do you think that supply chains have gotten more complicated, more simplified, or did these need to be rethought in general?
I think all of the above. In some cases, they've gotten simplified. Companies like McDonald's said, enough, I don't want other people, to your point exactly. I don't wanna rely on anybody else to deliver anything, to do anything, I just wanna get my stuff. And the only way you can do that is to invest the money and control it yourself, and put redundancy in place. Right? You got enough trucks, if a truck breaks down, you have another truck to pick it up. You got enough employees, if that employee knows to show up, you have another employee that fits in. They've gotten more complex with the more complexity of products. You know, our phones are a perfect example. There's probably 20 different suppliers that go create that phone, that size Samsung. So South Korea has created, but at the end of the day, they don't create the chips, they don't create the screen, they don't create the outside, so all that's gotta come together. That's 15, 20 suppliers, gotta be shipped to the United States. So I think it has to be rethought. I think it needs to come back to the US. We need to look strategically at the components that are necessary for us to operate this country, and we need to all agree that we're going to pay a little more, because we're not beating kids to go work in a factory, right? And we need to be socially responsible enough to understand that that's gonna be a cost. And I'm all for that.
Is there any research on how profitable companies that don't outsource are? Do they beat out outsourced companies, or do they
Depends on the
generally?
economy, so in the current economy, it probably wouldn't be very effective.
Yeah.
But in a competitive environment, yes, because you can go out, I used to be able to go to a company called Freight Quote, and I would say, give me a price on freight. And 6 companies would bid, and they would all kind of vie for the business. Now I have to beg them to take it and pay a ridiculous amount of money. So it depends on the economy. If the economy, it's supply and demand simply. I mean, if there's more people willing to buy goods, right, that's what we got inflation now as a result of that, that's a simple thing. There's too much money chasing too few goods.
Can there be monopoly in a supply chain? So for example, going back to your point of virtual, whatever, ebooks almost, you can only buy Harry Potter if it's copyrighted by that one girl. Or for music, Baby Keem album, only Baby Keem can give that out to people, he's a main distributor and he can get it on other Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, but he, in a supply and demand curve, he's all the supply, their music, unless they're signed to a music, whatever, a record label.
Yeah, you're getting into trademark and copyright.
So is that different from?
It is, because I've established, our logo is trademark. Nobody can go out and do our logo. If they do, technically I can sue them. So the music is intellectual property. So that's different.
So.
You own that content, you determine the distribution. If she's talking about doing art, right? You create your art, and it's a one-of-a-kind piece, but you go find someone knocks it off. But you've copyrighted that. Or you've done a graphics logo for somebody, and somebody else takes that logo and monetizes it in a way that doesn't give you any money. You have the right to sue them.
Yes.
That's not monopolistic in that sense.
That's just the.
She's got copyright and trademark on that. It's her property, it's her intellectual property. She's going into art, what comes out of her head, what her thoughts, what her vision are owned by her, and nobody else can own that.
I have another thought for the supply chain of how companies can change, at least Apple, as well as BMW, those sort of things, their supply chain is sort of like McDonald's in the sense that only their products can be used on their products. So BMW, for example, if your car breaks down the side of the road, it's not you can use any type of oil or maybe not oil, but you know what I mean, parts to fix it, you have to use the BMW parts, and that monopolizes not monopolizes, but in that industry of car, if you're getting a BMW, you know you have to go to BMW for the most part.
Right, so automotive, there's plenty of people that can create additional parts. So there's parts that work from probably 100 different companies on a BMW. Oil filters,
Really?
right, absolutely.
Okay, I thought it was only the Apple,
You have-
you can only use the Apple charger for the Apple.
That case, no, there's knockoffs. There's a charger that works, but there's a question about whether or not Apple slows down the charging based on a non-Apple charger.
Mm-hmm.
It's also kind of the conversation about what the hell happens to your phone when a new phone comes out. I'd like to know that magic when my phone slows down, when I'm 2
Yes.
generations
Yes.
late.
You could probably read it in the terms and conditions.
Sorry?
You could probably read it in the terms and conditions.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's in terms and conditions.
Bill, I'm gonna stop us right now. Firstly, that was excellent. That was just excellent, and I don't think any of us